What if business could create a true, financially optimal, customer-driven operation? What would that look like? How could it be achieved? OCX Cognition is committed to helping companies build that new model for customer-driven business operations. This is a model where end-to-end customer experience is continuously measured, factored into decision-making throughout the enterprise, and it's a model that is proven in the real world today. In today's presentation, I'm going to cover three topics. I'm going to start by talking about the unrealized vision for customer experience that's emerged over the last 20 years, ever since my team was involved in the creation of the Net Promoter Score methodology. We're going to talk about the one problem that needs to be solved if CX is to accomplish its true value to the enterprise. And then I'm going to deliver a somewhat immodest proposal as to how that problem can be solved and how we're solving it today. But perhaps most interesting for this audience, I'm going to share some of the insights that we've already gleaned from looking at entirely new data sources and how that's informed the way in which companies can maximize customer experience and financial benefits. Well, first, let's start in 2003, where my team, in collaboration with our board member and investor, Fred Reicheld, created the Net Promoter Score. Net Promoter Score represents the breakthrough in the engagement of corporate leadership around the ideal of differential customer experience as a business strategy based on one simple idea. And that idea was that loyalty drives growth. And of course, growth is what the stock market rewards. From 2003, we implemented over 1,000 enterprise customer experience programs using NPS and our technology, and trained over 6,000 companies in our specifically developed NPS methodology. It seemed like everybody was using NPS. But at the same time, NPS was falling short of a lot of the executives' expectations. The first thing that usually came up was the idea of fully understanding in time the risk of customers. One of your top 50 customers, for example, is disappointed by a product rollout. Perhaps that's the last in a sequence of otherwise minor service or product failures. You know intuitively the probability of them renewing their contract drops. Maybe statistically it drops from 80% to 50%. Imagine if the events we're talking about, which are already captured in your everyday operational systems, were to instantly trigger a call to action across multiple levels of management, perhaps before your own team even knew of the problem, and certainly before they'd characterized it as significant. Perhaps equally importantly, what if those events didn't create an outcome that requires action? You don't want to allocate resources every time something goes wrong if you don't understand the significance of it. But you do understand that failure to address problems early creates much more significant mitigation costs. The second thing we were told was that every organization that's built on functional teams wants to create a single view of the truth. But they want that view of the truth to be customer calibrated, not internally. That gives a chance for all these cross-functional teams to align around a unified customer viewpoint. A typical large enterprise has 6 different organizations facing the customer in many different capacities. What if they had a common view of how every element of their operations connected to create a promoter, a contract renewal? What if that view was based on critical operational elements that significantly impacted the customer? And what if the performance targets were exactly calibrated to create a collectively good outcome? Third and finally, we heard that the leadership team of the company was seeking an operational formula for customer success, a kind of short list of critical metrics that they could align the entire company around. Such a list would have high communication value, but would also have proven connectivity to the financial outcomes that they were seeking. Against this standard, it has to be said, the customer experience programs of the last 20 years have often fallen short. And that's due to a fundamental limitation: data. The relationship survey is the buggy whip of the technology world. It's essential today for many companies when they think of measuring the end-to-end experience. And it can't be easily substituted for by, for example, using transactional surveys in a contact center that have a much more narrow focus. But they're plagued with challenges. Low frequency, where you can only really ask a customer once or twice a year the questions that you really want answered. Low response rates, maybe short of 20% in enterprise businesses. Sample bias. At the end of the day, extrapolation works quite well in homogeneous customer groups, but most businesses do not have anything approaching homogeneity across a business-to-business customer group, for example. Often the respondents are the wrong people within the enterprise, and if you're not careful, you end up with a very incomplete life cycle coverage where you tend to measure the things you can as opposed to the things that really matter. Don't just take our word for it. McKinsey did a recent study which identified that only 13% of CX leaders are confident that their organization can take action in real time, and only 16% think the surveys allow them to get to the root cause of performance. What companies really want is a completely different type of data. If you ask them for their wish list, they'd characterize it these ways. They want complete data that tells them about every single account, not just ones that respond to surveys. They want it continuously updated so that events that occur today are immediately actioned before they become big problems. And they want those data sets connected to operational variables they can actually use to run the company. If that's the wish list, it requires a step function improvement in how we think about CX data. How on earth can we accomplish that? Well, McKinsey actually went on to make the critical observation here that why would you ask customers about experience when data you already have about those interactions can be used to create predictions? And that's the essence of what we do. Our technology today gathers data from multiple operating systems within the business that already exist and are already continuously collecting that data. Now, that's not to say that all that data is well organized, and so one of the most fundamental things our platform does is get data from these systems and fits it into an organized data framework that's based on our own particular structured journey model. From there, the customer journey model forms the basis of the predictive algorithms. We train a machine learning engine to essentially think like your customer, a customer who, to stretch the metaphor, would answer 2,000 survey questions honestly every single day, which essentially is what the machine does, and it uses that to generate a massive data set. That data set doesn't just encompass the attitudinal data we all come to expect, such as Net Promoter Score, but also customer journey performance data, satisfaction with every journey stage, KPI performance across every level of the customer journey. It enables us to determine optimal KPI designs, and ultimately, it predicts financial outcomes that are critical for the company. The data from our cloud data warehouse can be distributed to every member of the frontline team through mobile applications or through the systems of engagement they already use. An analyst can access the data warehouse through analytic tools, not just our own, but also existing industry BI products like Tableau and Power BI, to create much more detailed analysis and reporting. In the first year of operation, our platform did over 1 million predictions. And that million prediction achieves somewhere in the order of 75 to 85% accuracy in being able to predict customers' behavior, a number that's continuously improving. And the volume of data is growing 400% year on year, meaning that we'll typically generate over 2,000 data features per customer. But I promised to talk about some of the things that we learned from insights from looking at that significant data set. Let me start with perhaps the most provocative one. The NPS score you think you have isn't your NPS score. Whilst you may look at a sample of your customers and obtain an NPS score, in this instance 15, it actually turns out that when you look at all your customers through being able to predict every single customer individually, the NPS score is considerably different, in this instance 5. Why is this? Well, of course, this is because we assume homogeneity, but in B2B that's certainly not true. Customers come in a whole variety of profiles, economic sizes, and even in business-to-consumer markets, companies want to sub-segment their customers down to micro groups of behavior, spending power, and product profiles. And that breaks again the homogeneity assumption. When we look at a true NPS generated by looking at each individual customer or account, we see a significant difference. The second big insight is that time is a significant factor when it comes to understanding what NPS looks like in companies, and it actually works against you. For example, you might think that you're running your operations today at a very high level. You've improved from perhaps delivering on a detractor level of experience to a promoter level of experience. You would expect to start that showing up in your NPS results, but it doesn't. The problem is one of time. We have to go backwards to understand the implications of prior experiences on the current state of the customer and the turning circle required for the customer to change their behaviors. In almost every circumstance, prior customer scores anchor existing performance. It tells us that if a customer was a detractor 6 months ago, that has a major bearing on whether they're a detractor or promoter today, irrespective of the level of execution of your business. Because we can quantify that, we start to understand turning circle, and we can explain why results may not be improving even if your operations are. The third observation is that people work best when they work collaboratively with machine learning and AI programs. For this, I'm going to reference some of the work from Tom Malone at MIT. Tom makes the point that too much time is spent talking about substituting people's jobs for machines, and we don't spend enough time thinking about how this works together. The fact is that it's not a tug of war between your customer-facing employees and algorithms that predict the behavior of customers. It's a complementary technology. Human beings make much better decisions when they're armed with data. That's not to say their point of view is wrong. It's simply to say their point of view can be improved significantly. The final point we make is that prediction has reversible value. What we mean by that is because we're using operational variables to create predictions, we're also able to reverse that and look at the root cause of those predictions based on optimal operational performance. Back in the 1990s, when I last worked for Dell Computer Corporation, 6 key operating metrics determined the bonus plan for all executives. It was essentially Dell's effort to create a formula for customer success. And it worked very well for its day. But it was very much guesswork back then, as opposed to an analytic framework that convinced us that these were the 6 variables and these were the calibration points of performance that we need to establish. This is a busy slide, but what it shows us is that we can take an outcome like NPS and we can track it back not just through the journey steps and the operational drivers, but right down to the data points and KPIs that we know created that outcome. This form of attribution gives very specific identification of the right kind of levers that the company needs to pull in order to create outcomes. It's essentially a formula for creating business success. Ultimately, predictive data sets represent a game-changing operation, not just for collaboration, but for understanding how to create promoters amongst your customers and great financial outcomes for them.